I'm going to introduce you. This is Laura Moss, or Laura Moss, writer and director of Rebirth, one of my favorite films of 2023, I have to say. The film plays with a lot of different topics that I found interesting. I wanted to know, where did the idea of the film came from?
So I first read Frankenstein, the novel, when I was about 13, in school. And it was the first book I read by a woman that in school that I really latched onto. Other books, Jane Austen and Emily Bronte were about marriage and petticoats and manners, and I couldn't relate to them. And when I read Frankenstein, I was just blown away by how bold it was and how big the themes were. And I became obsessed with Mary Shelley, the author, who was really young at the time, who suffered miscarriages pretty early on in her life and experienced a lot of death and grief in her own life. And I think the idea of this Victor Frankenstein and Mary Shelley herself kind of fused in my mind. And I was really interested in exploring a character who wanted to create life with her mind, but needed to use the products of her body in order to do so. And that's kind of where it came from. I just started writing journal entries from the point of view of this character, and the story kind of unfolded.
Well, I was saying, I love the clinical aspect of the film.
I know.
Mostly on the setting and the production design. And I know you have a background as an EMT.
Yes, I was an EMT briefly before I worked in the film industry. And I think, it affected me in a lot of ways. I think, I knew that this film, I wanted to be really unsparing. Like, I wanted to not look away from the medical realities that I was portraying. And I think, knew enough to know what I didn't know. Like, it was very important to me that we bring on a medical advisor for this movie, because I knew that, for the audience, it needed to feel grounded. It needed to feel real.
I know that you also have a background as a production designer. For example, the apartment for me becomes like a character.
Yeah, I'm a production designer. I loved my production designers. They are filmmakers, they're directors. So we had this real mind meld where, the Rose's mother doesn't appear very much in the film, but we wanted her to be felt throughout. And this is the home that Rose grew up in. So it was really important to us for this apartment to feel layered.
It's interesting, like the way it's shot, because it feels like different apartments.
Frankenstein.
I also, well, of course, I wanted to talk about the characters and the actresses that portray these characters.
Yes.
Their performances are like award-winning for me. And I was wondering about the casting process. Did you have these actresses in mind while you were writing the script, or how was like this process of casting these wonderful actresses?
Yes, for Celia, for Judy Reyes's character, I had her in mind from the beginning. It's interesting, she's known in the US, maybe worldwide, as Carla in Scrubs.
Scrubs,
she's
of
known
course,
for her comedic acting,
comedian,
and she's fabulous. But I had seen her in a very small independent film in 2013 called Gun Hill Road. That was very grounded, real drama, and so I knew she was incredible. I knew she could play this part. In terms of Rose, I've been a big fan of Marin's. She's a character actress. She works a lot, but I had seen her. She's a New York actress, and I had seen her on Broadway and on stage. But I had a very strict criteria for who I thought could actually play this role. And when I sort of stripped it down, when I was really thinking about the biggest offer, I wanted it to be Marin. And I was lucky because, the production company Shudder that we were working with also loved Marin. She had been in another horror movie a few years ago with them called The Dark and the Wicked.
Oh, and yeah.
So they knew, what a powerhouse actress she was. Yeah. And so they, you don't always agree with the studio in terms of casting, but they were 100% on board. So I was very lucky in that respect.
I also felt like these characters kind of subvert the idea of good and evil. What can you tell us about that?
I did want them to cross, in this film, and that was important to me, that we really begin the film very suspicious of Rose and her motives. And as you say, she really seems to be the villain in the piece, where Celia is very relatable and her motivations are very relatable. And it was important to me to sort of harden her over the course of the film and really develop, in a very small way, Rose's empathy. I also wanted to play with the idea of sort of who is the monster that is created in Frankenstein. It's the obvious answer is that it's the little girl, but I think in many ways it could be read as Celia herself, who's trapped by this woman because she can't really let go of her daughter and experience like a normal cycle of grief.
And what I really loved is like the relationship between these characters and how they become like kind of a family, and I felt like there's like a queer aspect of it, on the whole film.
Yeah, I don't think as you say, the queerness is not explicit in the film, but it was something I discussed a lot with the actors, and it's something that is very personal to me. I'm non-binary. I have like an uneasy, evolving relationship with my body and the idea of womanhood. And so I think so does Rose, even though I think because she's very literal minded, she would not use the word non-binary. She wouldn't engage with that vocabulary.
I don't know if you're a horror fan.
Sure. Well, I'm a huge horror fan, and like you said, I'm a fan of traditional horror, and I don't think this film is a traditional horror film. I don't know how this will translate, but I always use the term horror adjacent, like this is next to a horror film, because I do believe that people who love horror, certain people will be attracted to it. But I'm always worried when it is marketed like a horror film, because I don't, if people are expecting jump scares, they're not going to get it. I grew up on Rosemary's Baby and sort of more subtle psychological horror films where you're not seeing a lot of gore, but you are experiencing dread. And I think dread was a word that I kept coming back to when I was talking to my DP. How do we elicit this feeling more than how do we deliver the moments that people expect from a horror film?
Well, and I wanted to know what's next for you.
Sure. Yeah, we're kind of at the end of our festival run in the US. I think that we're done in the US, but we just premiered at the London Film Festival. We're doing this interview on October 18th. So I'm beginning to tour with some European festivals. In terms of what I'm working on, I'm part of the Writers Guild of America. So we were on strike for a good part of this year. I'm lucky enough to have a writing job for a new film adapting a horror novel that I can't exactly talk about yet, but that's what I'm working on right now. And I have a feature written, like a personal original feature written that I'm hoping to make next. This was such a pleasure, and I hope we can continue this conversation in person.
Thank you so much. Okay. Congratulations for your film.